Well, the Puritan Richard Baxter has a 300-page book on self-denial. 300 pages. We're just scratching the surface. So please feel free to seek that resource out if you desire. I do believe it's online. But he has supplied us with a list for self-evaluation in this area of dying to self. And so I just wanted to go over 7 of the things that he says and just talk about them a little bit. Not a lot, but just enough to maybe when you hear your sister in the room share an idea, it will spark an idea in your mind of maybe something you hadn't thought about, and we can bless each other that way. So the first one I would like to read to you says, "Never be deluded to forget the vanity, the brevity, and the emptiness and insufficiency of all these earthly things around you, which self so attaches itself to, so as to neglect the promised life of blessedness. Remind yourself what nothingness this world is, that those of earth revolve their lives around." So I wrote a 2023 summary for us. Materialism is a foolish religion. Die to your worship of anything in this world. Okay, so let's just share some honest things. What kinds of things do we, even as Christian women, still tend to worship? There are not wrong answers here. Yes? Money. We still are tempted to worship money. What else? Homes, I heard. Outward beauty. We still want to look nice when we show up to the conference, right? Where's that line? Where's that line between looking good, honoring the Lord, not being like offensively not put together, and thinking too much about it, where our hearts want that recognition? Our homes, one of you said, our homes. What is it about our homes? You want to impress others, okay? We want to control the things that are our little kingdom. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Here, I don't have to talk to all those people out there. Uh-huh. That's not my personal issue, but I am aware that that is an issue for some people. Yeah, I was reminded, like, hospitality, the difference between hospitality and entertaining. Like, are we entertaining people with our home, or are we actually offering hospitality, which is like a hospital? Are we bringing in those that we may minister to? Are we bringing them in and look at my things? I find this is most showed by what we say when people walk in the door. Excuse A, B, and C, because it's not perfect. Guilty. Okay, so things we might worship as Christian women still, we're tempted to still hold on to and not want to deny ourselves in money, in our external, what we look like externally, in our homes. If, like, the worst case scenario in your mind is that your house is burned or washed away or destroyed in some way, like, I remember when Hurricane Irma was coming, and the children and I fled, I should say, to Tennessee and left Mark, and he's like, okay, it's actually, now that you've been gone a few days, it's like actually going to hit our house. What do you want me to grab? Oh, okay. What? Okay. I'm like literally walking through the rooms of my house in my mind. It was a really good exercise for me. I was like, okay, just grab the photos of the children, like, what else? What else is worth anything that can't be replaced? So taking those opportunities are a blessing to consider. What if I had no home? Could I be content? Could I be happy? Could I still praise the Lord? What if I lost some aspect of my external beauty? What if we had no money? So we need to recognize that materialism is a foolish religion, and God calls us to put off that earthly mindedness. Not taking a U-Haul to heaven with us. We can't take it with us. We need to hold it lightly. Good. Thank you for interacting. Good job. Number 2. To promote your self-denial, here's what you can do. Consider frequently and seriously who God is and to what end he made, redeemed, sustains, and governs the world. And then consider whether it should ever be that this glorious God should be neglected. Because we get our eyes on ourselves, we're therefore not looking at him. So the 2023 summary: what you think and practice, you are. So are you thinking and practicing according to who God is and knowing his providence in your life? What are things we think of instead of God's character? What do we distract ourselves with and self-focus? See if I'm asking the question right. Comfort. What shall we eat? What shall we wear? Good. Very biblical of you. I hear Jesus talking. What were you adding?
Future plans.
Oh, yes. Future plans. Especially the younger we are, right? Young ladies, what will my life look like? How will it turn out? Anything else? What we talk about, I heard. Okay. And over here?
Everything that we talked about in the first lesson.
And the money and the external beauty and the home and the family members, maybe. What we think and what we practice, we are. We need to focus on, should we be distracted with those things instead of God himself? So we do not want to focus on them and neglect our God. Number 3, to promote your self-denial, remember what you will get by selfishness. God will have his ends and honor out of you, one way or another. Whether you will to or not, he will have your goods from you. He will have your lives from you. And the faster and tighter you hold to them, the more you will suffer when he wrings them out of your hands. Nothing like a Puritan to just... Here's my 2023 summary. Kicking and screaming doesn't look good on anyone. I was not meant to be a Puritan writer. So, what are some things God has had to wring out of your hands to teach you that life is not about you? Oh, career. That's a good one. Anyone else willing to share? Children. Whether they're actual lives, whether it's their salvation, whether it's even them leaving home when they're 18 and you're like, no. Nope, not ready for this. That's right. God will have his ends. I don't like change, Lord. And he says, oh yeah? Here's a bunch. He does that, doesn't he? For our good and for his glory. This is so hard. I mean, I'm standing here thinking about my dreams and desires and things that I desire. And it's like, okay, Lord, I want you to have that. No, I don't. I want you to have it. I don't want you to take it the hard way. But am I willing to totally let it go for the sake of not having him take it by me kicking and screaming at the end of it all? Anything else you can think of? Health? Oh. Yes. I remember a dear friend telling me when she finally got to the point with her health where it was, God, I keep praying for good health. But if that's not what you want, then that's not what I need to be praying for. Hard lessons. All right, so kicking and screaming doesn't look good on anyone. Number 4, if you would promote self-denial, keep with you the continual feeling of your own unworthiness and insufficiency. If you would promote self-denial, keep with you the continual feeling of your own unworthiness and insufficiency. Here's my 2023 summary. Put off being proud and seeking the praise of everyone around you. We do this without realizing even. I've heard pastors call it like the humble brag. Oh, this is what's going on, just so y'all can know. What are wrong ways that we consider ourselves unworthy or insufficient? What are wrong ways we look at that?
We are what we do. And how we act, the human doing instead of the human being.
Interesting. Human doing. So what are wrong ways we consider ourselves unworthy, insufficient? So God has told us that we aren't worth less, right? So what are some wrong ways that we consider ourselves unworthy and insufficient?
Economic status, putting place in things and levels of human society,
Okay,
like not being an elite or something like that.
sure.
Not stepping into something that God may be calling you to do because you're afraid.
Have you experienced that?
Maybe at different times I feel like I'm not able to do it, but really I'm not. But with him, I could if I would just trust in him.
Yeah.
That fear kind of, I don't know, fear like hold me back in certain areas because I feel like I don't, I'm not like, everybody learns differently, and I'm not like real book smart, but I may have other qualities that the Lord could still use, but I will feel less than
Right.
myself.
Right. They say the comparison game is the thief of joy. So when we compare ourselves to one another, what you're saying is true. I wouldn't be standing here right now, right here, if I, who would want to, like, this is God's word. This is a high accountability. Who am I to say things at all? That's why it has to be God's word, and it has to be about him and our willingness to do what he may push us to do. And even at different seasons of life, I was talking to some of your ladies last evening just about the Spirit. It can empower you to do different things at different times. That doesn't mean that's always what you're going to do. So you may say, you know what, there's just this need in the Sunday school, and the Lord is going to help me if I get over my fears about teaching kids and they're going to run over me or something terrible is going to happen. You just get in there and do it because the Spirit is calling you to do it. But that doesn't mean you're like always going to do that. So yes, fighting against our fears about things that he may call us to do is definitely an area where we say, I'm unworthy, I'm insufficient, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough. It's not about us. It's about being God's mouthpiece or being God's hands or being God's feet. Finding areas that you can, especially we as women, we can so minister to other people out of our kitchens, out of our homes, out of our lives. We just invite people in. We just take the food. We meet at the park. It's just this natural aspect that doesn't require great skill to be hands and feet of the Lord. What are good ways that we should consider ourselves unworthy or insufficient? Would you like to add more to that? No? Would anyone else like to add more to what she's saying? Who is equipped? Were you equipped for all the trials that parenting would bring? Did your mother properly teach you how to do everything that was going to come your way? No, I can't imagine even the most meticulously teaching mother could really cover everything. I was like, okay, I'm going to raise my children and I'm going to have no regrets. I'm also the same person who was like, okay, if children don't have a memory until they're like 4, I'm going to deal with all my wrong attitudes and actions and be done with all of that by the time my oldest is 4, because then she won't remember my sin. Yeah, that didn't work. Yeah, it's through our sin we show our children what sinners do with sin, because that's what they need to learn. So we do seek to live in such a way that God uses us as parents, and we have to trust him with the outcome because it is not up to us. You could sin incredibly. You could even be an unbeliever. Lord willing, no one in this room. You could be an unbeliever and your child turn out right and love the Lord. That's my husband, raised in, we'll say the dead branch of the Wragg family. He was raised by unbelievers in an ungodly home, and then was radically saved at the age of 18. You could raise children in the church. You could do everything right, and your child not be saved. It is not up to us. We are called to be faithful. Sorry, soapbox. Okay. What are right ways that we should consider ourselves unworthy, insufficient, not parenting?
I think being able to, we ask God's forgiveness every single day for the sin that we commit. Okay? But there are times also that not only do we ask for his forgiveness, but I think what's hard for us as human beings is to ask for forgiveness from those that we wrong at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not just a matter of asking him, but also going to that person, and it could be a parent, it could be a child, it could be a coworker, it could be anybody, even somebody in the church.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a big part of that walk that we have.
Right.
And it's that pride thing.
That's it.
It's that pride. It's like, I already said it to God, but it's not 100% good until you go to that other person.
Yeah, and that's where it takes that humility. I am insufficient to act perfectly towards you, whoever you may be. I am insufficient, and I have to admit that to you. Now, the sin is ultimately against God because he set the standard. Even like I had to remind myself of that as a parent. My child is sinning against me in this, but I'm directing them towards God and seeking not to take that personally. But I still teach them to ask my forgiveness because I was just in the middle between them and God. Shrapnel, so, like their sin shrapnel was hitting me or their sibling, or like literally hitting their sibling. So yes, but always it's like the sin is against God. Yes, we must ask God's forgiveness. But then we hurt, who says it, like our sin splashes on people around us. And it is good for our humility and our dying to self to admit that and to ask forgiveness. Not just, oh, I'm sorry. No, please forgive me for. That's a great point. Okay, I will let us move on from that very painful question. No, there's more. Okay, number 5. If you would live in self-denial, be sure that you keep the mastery of your senses and do not let them be ungoverned, but shut them up when reason requires it. It is your appetite and senses that feed this carnal, selfish vice. It is your appetite and senses that feed this carnal, selfish vice, but reason and faith are both against it. So 2023 summary. We are to be in the world, but not to be of it. I think it's safe to say that the culture and world that we find ourselves in is driven by senses and passions and personal feelings. So in what ways do our eyes and touch and taste and smell and hearing try to rule us? What's that? Media. Uh-huh. You said every way? Well, true. Yes, the media draws us in, lures us in to our desires. It, what's the word? I'm not thinking of the word. Entices, thank you. Very good. Clickbait. It entices that flesh within us. We see it with our eyes. We hear it in music. We want to taste and eat of the goodness around us. We're like the boy in Narnia with the Turkish delight, right? Although I hear that really isn't delightful. What do reason and faith do for us instead with those feelings? How can we use reason and faith? Self-control. Fruit of the Spirit. Self-control comes through the Spirit to us. It's no wonder that unbelievers have no self-control, or our children. Someone else was going to say something? Reason and faith balance us. Yeah. So if you read Romans 1, it talks about how those who are not of God become so foolish and unreasonable like animals, and then they act unbecomingly, men with men, women with women, etc. That is reason being taken away, God being removed from people's lives, so to speak, and just given over to their senses, their lusts and their passions. But that is not how you were taught, Paul says. So we have reason, which governs us, wisdom from above that is pure and sensible. And then we have faith. Does anyone have Hebrews 11:1 memorized? Yes? No? Now faith is being... Does someone want to say it louder? Sure. Now faith is being certain of what we hope, sure of what we hope for, and certain of what we cannot see. And we are called to walk by faith. Okay? This is what God promised. This is what God commands. Now I go do it. And I trust him. So I let my child go. I make this decision that seems like a gray area, but wisdom could go either way. I walk by faith. I trust him with the outcome, whether it's good or bad, because ultimately he is in charge and he is to be trusted. That is faith. Believing in a God you don't see with your eyes, but you believe that what he says in his word is true. That will guide you over the screens, the sounds, the tastes, everything that you see around you, like Vanity Fair and Pilgrim's Progress, those things that call to you and appeal to your flesh. All right, 2 more. It should much promote your self-denial to study well the self-denying example of Christ and his eminent servants that have walked in his steps. So look to Christ, look to the heroes of faith. Christ had no sinful self to deny, nor any corrupted flesh to mortify or subdue, and yet he had a self-denial in which we must imitate him. 2023 summary. Do not please yourself and look to those who did that. What things in your daily life do you think are just too much for you to die to? Sleep. No joke. Yeah, this might help you. Think of what things you think of more as rights than privileges. Sleep. Junk food, sugar.
You know what I'm saying? That overindulgence.
Yeah.
Like, if it's if you're saying it's a right compared to a privilege, we're privileged that we can go and buy extras rather than just the bare minimum.
Yeah, absolutely.
To meet our needs.
Uh-huh. Right. So how can we not please ourselves in all of these things? We might think it would just be too much to die to sugar. No joke. I mean, honestly, sugar and fat put together is the best. Yes.
Can you repeat what you said? Do not please yourself and look to those
Who basically who lived like Christ as well, who died to themselves. The heroes of the faith. Hebrews 11 continues on about those who walked by faith. Missionary stories. How many of you have read George Mueller or know the story of George Mueller? Not many. Okay. Whew. I read his book and I'm like, no, that's just too much. Which is what we're talking about. Like, you're running an orphanage and you're not actually pursuing the food to feed the children. You're praying and asking God to supply it and trusting every day. No, God, I need to plan that. he didn't. It's very in your face when you read about George Mueller, who took care of the orphans in England. Okay, last one. But the greatest help to self-denial is to retire from the creature into God, to live in the love of him, and employ the soul continually upon him. Men will not be frightened from self-love. It must be another more powerful love that must draw them from it. And that can be none but the love of God. Men will not be frightened from self-love. They must be drawn. It's almost like a child, right? You're going to scare them into obedience, or you're going to nurture them into it. 2023 summary. Grow in death to self-love by asking God to help you with that. Grow in death to self-love by asking God to help you with it. So at the end of the day, what really keeps you from dying to self-actions?
Fear of God.
Well, I'm sorry, what?
Fear of God.
Fear of God keeps you from, like actual fear?
Like holy, like good fear of God.
Yeah, I'm saying the opposite, sorry. It's okay. At the end of the day, what is actually keeping you from doing, it's okay. See, that's everyone's fear, right? If I speak up, I'm going to say something wrong, but that's why I don't want you to fear, because we're all here to love each other, because next time it'll be us. So what keeps us at the end of the day, when you look at your day, okay, why did I not die to self there or there?
Fear of our own desires.
Our own desires, just playing out our selfishness, right?
Embarrassment. Like, if I do that, I'm going to look silly in front of people because they're not going to understand why I'm doing it.
Right.
They're just going to think you're just letting someone walk all over you.
Uh-huh. I see that even in the church. Why is that person serving so much? It's because you're convicted. They need to slow down. They're making the rest of us look bad. Ooh, wrong. Wrong. There are people in the church running circles around other people. We don't let that keep us from it, and we don't let that pollute our minds by thinking evilly about them. God, I have a dear friend. We drive to the gym 3 days a week, and I was recently talking to her about bandwidth. Okay, everyone's got this bandwidth, and they can do this much in their day. And some of us have bandwidth like this, God's gift, and some of us have bandwidth like this, also God's gift, because he wants this person to just be really good in this, and he wants this person to be good in all of this. God, it's back to God. So I was talking about bandwidth. She's like, I have a new idea about that. She's like, all of us have a suitcase. And I'm like, okay, all right. She's like, we're all going through life. I'm always in Pilgrim's Progress. So I'm like on the road, suitcase, can't take it to heaven. No, suitcase. And she's like, we all are given life, and we're all given basically the same thing. But it's all about how we can pack our suitcase. So some of us can pack a lot into the suitcase. We're like rolling it up. We're like space bag, sucking the air out, trying to do as much as we can. And some people, it's like the clothes are just really like kind of thrown in there, and it just takes up more space that way, right? But that's what God gave them to do. So we all have the same suitcase life, but it's all in how it's packed, or how we pack it, or how God helped us pack it. We all can do different amounts. We all just still have the same size suitcase, but we just can. All that to say, I'm not sure how I got there. But what keeps us at the end of the day, we're looking at our day, and what else kept us from doing what we should in dying to self?
Is it just wanting to be our own God?
Yeah, absolutely. Us wanting to be our own God. My life, my way, my rules, my desires, my way or the highway. That is why you were given the book called Selfishness. Okay. Any other comments from what we just talked about? Anyone have anything?
Busyness and distractions.
Yes. Oh, thank you. I did want to talk about that. Busyness and distractions, not paying attention, just floating through life, not being purposeful with truth. So when you see an area of weakness in your life, the question is, what do you do about it? You all came here today, you're like, yay, women's conference, fellowship, God's word, yay. Oh no. This is why I'm like, sorry. Didn't really want to share this with you because that means I have to listen to it too, and then my daughters are going to hold me accountable. And when we don't pay attention to the weaknesses, they're just going to stay there. They're not going to get better. You're going to get to the end of the day and you're going to have not paid attention. And those weaknesses just drag from day to day to day. Now, the kindness of God is that he doesn't reveal all of our weaknesses to us all at once. Like on the day of salvation, you find out every single way you're terribly wrong. And you would just be crushed and flat, and you would never walk down that path towards heaven. You wouldn't pick up your suitcase and go. So God is kind that he reveals things. And so by coming here today, you're now made very aware. I like to give you lots of opportunity to look at your life and to do that self-evaluation. Say, okay, where am I weak and how can I do better tomorrow? How can I glorify God better? How can I serve others better? How can I be less focused on me and more focused on others? I mean, think of someone in your life who it's just so glaringly obvious how self-centered they are. It's not pretty, is it? What if that's you? And you're not seeing it. So that's why we want to take these opportunities to self-evaluate and then say, okay, God, I'm not going to be ignorant anymore. Like I knew that was in your word, but I haven't been looking at it. We don't want to be ignorant anymore. We want to take the time to think about it, look at our lives and say, God, this is what I must die to. These are the areas I need to crucify and hang them on the cross. You paid the penalty for these ugly sins. And I don't want to keep lugging them along with me. I want to mortify them, which means kill them, and lay them down so that I can be more useful to you, more love towards you, more love towards others, more useful to others, more opportunity to see with clear eyes and an open heart pipe how I can be loving to God and to others and not even worry about myself, because that is nowhere in the 2 greatest commandments. It doesn't talk about us making sure everything's right with our world. It's about loving God and loving others. So we're going to look at 6 areas that I came up with for you. I know there are more areas, but when I sat down after doing all that we just went through, okay, what are the 6 areas that we might struggle the most with in dying to self? We as women in particular. And so here's the 6. I'll give them to you. The first is in our homes. Second is in our church. Third is in the world. Fourth is in our words. Didn't say I was going to be easy on you, huh? Fifth is in our fear of man. And then we're also going to talk about, I lost it. Oh, trials. Dying to self in our trials. So, in the first session, we talked about God's interests dominate over our desires. That's the definition of dying to self for us, that God's interests would dominate over our desires. We talked about how our desires are laid at the cross, crucified, as it were, for the sake of others' needs. Sometimes their wants, but not necessarily. And that punishing ourselves is not dying to self. That's not what we're talking about. So that's just a little recap. So the first area I want to hone in on, bring in the microscope, the magnifying glass, look carefully at dying to self in the home. And again, I want to say, who felt perfectly equipped? The home is the microscope. It is everything laid bare and vulnerable We get really comfy around these people that we live day in and day out with, and who we really are is exposed there. So many of us don't feel equipped in our homes, whether it's with your husband, or raising little copies of yourself or copies of your husband. Or even we'll say for those of you who aren't married, in your home with your parents and your siblings. It's who we really are. When my children were small and they would be fighting amongst each other, there were a lot of children in our home. So there was a lot of, not getting along so well with each other. And so I would remind them, listen, these siblings that God gave you are your very best friends, handpicked by God. He said, you know who's best for Lizzie? It's Sarah. You know who's best for Sarah? It's Leah. You know who's best for Leah? It's Jacob. God hand chose all the siblings in a home. And I would say, so if you can't get along with them, you will not be spending time with any other friends outside of this house. Because this is where the real rubber meets the road. We can kind of put on our best shine for people outside of our home. But who we are really inside of it. And once you leave your comfort of your mom and dad and siblings, and then you go have your own home, most people, not everyone, obviously, not everyone gets married. That's not the end all. But when you marry another sinner and then you give birth to more sinners, this is where dying to self really is challenged, because we really can put a shine on elsewhere. But that is who you really are. So if you're like, no, that's not who I am. It's me out here. Who I am at church. No, sorry. We don't buy it. So to go back to our asceticism comments about being a monk or a nun, many people thought that was the most godly thing. Give up comfy clothes, comfy bed, give up family, give up all earthly possessions. But how about in the home with all those people around you all the time? And the earthly possessions, and the sugar and fat, and right? That's where real godliness is tested. These people who know us so well, these things around us, honestly, the people in your home know you better than you know yourself, most likely, because we tend to have little blinders on. We tend to think we are a little shinier than we are. These people in your home, the people that you live with, whether you're a child or a parent or a grandparent or whomever, they offered us the greatest opportunity to help us with our sanctification and with our dying to self opportunities. The 5th and 6th chapter of Ephesians lay out some specifics of how the order of the home is to work for living a quiet and peaceable life, Ephesians says. So in the 5th and 6th chapter, we see, okay, God's like, all right, here's where self-denial really happens, children. Here's your hardest part. Obey your parents in the Lord. This is going to be your dying to self challenge. I give you one principle, children. Die to self by obeying your parents in the Lord. This is right and good. He says to all of us, be imitators of God as beloved children. Okay, children learn by the modeling that's shown to them. God says, model after me. That is dying to self, to act like Christ. Then he says again to children, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Okay, so actually there's two. They need to obey and they need to honor. That kills self-will within a young person. Then God commands all of us again, walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. Notice the words, gave himself up, dying to self. So how do we do that? It says walk in love. Love is self-sacrifice. Remember, self-sacrifice is patient, self-sacrifice is kind. Walk in that. Now he goes back. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. So he says, this is how you're going to have to really die to self, fathers. You need to not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So the teaching and the consequences, the proactive and the reactive. It all kills a parent's self-love to have to discipline a beloved child, to train day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute. You're doing this again? Yes, for the parent sanctification and the child. So this is how we die to self. Fathers will be tested in not provoking their children to anger. So God gives the command. Then it says to all of us, again, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So then do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Still in this whole section that's talking about family as well. We need to be spending our time wisely, being wise, being careful how we act and how we live. Then we're encouraged, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to God, even the Father, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. Well, our self-love would rather complain to other people and tell them how bad our life is than to actually speak, to put that aside, die to self, and be thankful and encourage others. Have you ever been just so personally weak, but the Lord helped you speak life for someone else and how that actually lifted you up out of your puddle? Oh, that is so neat when God does that in you. It takes that clean pipe to allow that to happen. But how beautiful it is to be able to speak truth to one another and always give thanks in our words. It really helps kill self. Okay, then he comes back around. Wives, this is where you're going to be tempted in self-love. So wives, be subject to your own husbands. This is dying to self. Do this as unto the Lord, because we know that men are imperfect leaders, but God made them. He chose, okay, men I'm going to have be the heads of the families. I want the wives to come under that. This is going to bring order to the family, but it's going to challenge the dying to self love. It says, but as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. So as you are saying, I must die to myself, I provide a picture to my children, to my friends, to the church, to the world of how the church submits to God. There is a much bigger thing at stake here than just me and my husband. Our example for God and his name is at stake. Then he circles around the husbands again. Husbands, love your wives. So husbands, self-sacrifice for your wives. Just as Christ also loved the church, gave himself up for her, so husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church. Nevertheless, each among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. So we see where we are each tempted towards self-love. The husband in denying what he wants and being gentle and cherishing and nourishing his wife and not expecting her to act like a man, but as the weaker vessel. And then wife, you're going to be tempted. You need to respect your husband. You need to die to self and show respect because God has made him the leader. So we see in the home where dying to self there is just full of opportunity. So these are the main areas God laid out for us to lay ourselves down on that living sacrifice altar. In the marriage relationship, in parenting, for children towards their parents, to one another in the family of Christ. We are not our own at all. And if you happen to be a mother, then you know that very well. You give up your sleep, your food sometimes, your personal space, your freedom to use the bathroom alone. You give up a lot. Self-sacrifice. And this is such a sweet gift of God to us to learn to give those things we might consider rights, our privileges, right? They are not rights. It's not a right to go to the bathroom by yourself. It's just nice. But this is a gift of God. We get the joy of watching young souls grow and mature and blossom. There have been so many sweet moments with my children and I, and I'm like, oh, Mark, you missed. Oh, that's a gift of God to moms. Extra special, too. We die to self by sacrificing ourselves for the good of the next generation. Again, we have to look broader. It's not just my home and these four walls. Preparing these children to go out and start new families and generation after generation. We want godly generations, which means we have to work hard and we have to deny ourselves a lot in order to propagate good, godly families from generation to generation. We need to be willing to give our children all that they need, not always what they want, but we have to give them what they need, including both pleasure and discipline. So we have to discipline ourselves to discipline our children. To teach a child self-control, you must have self-control. So we are growing and learning as we're training them, and that is dying to self. We die to ourselves for our children from the beginning of pregnancy, some of us more than others with the side effects of that. And until the day we die, we will be parents. It doesn't end at 18. It's not some magical end. It is your whole life. You will be a dying to self parents if you choose to submit to that what God has called you to. Submit to the character of Christ, and the sooner God can be honored through you, we will be that Proverbs 31 woman that is, her children rise up and call her blessed. And it is said, many have done nobly, but you excel them all. But that's possible for all of us. Now, I don't want you to go home today and talk to your husband and children about how they can die to self for you. You will be tempted. You can only look at your heart and entrust the Lord with their hearts. Your responsibility before God is for you. Now, I'm going to say something that many of you likely know. Maybe some of you don't. Most of you know this, but few of us live it out every day, including myself. And here it is. God calls you to die to yourself regardless of how your husband or father or children or your parents or your in-laws respond back to you. You knew that, right? But we struggle. So think about it for a moment. What you're saying to me, Jill, is that even if my husband acts selfishly, even if my kids act selfishly, I mean, that's redundant. Even if my in-laws or my parents act selfishly towards me, I am not allowed to respond back that way? No. We're not looking to defend ourselves. We're not looking to respond in kind or repay evil for evil. In James it says, to him who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, to him it is sin. So now I've told you. Now you know and you're accountable for it. We cannot respond in kind when we are sinned against, and it will happen every day in your home. We know that, but we fight against it. And so this is our daily death, is our relationships within our homes. And why Paul says, I die daily. It is daily, hourly, minute by minute, fighting against your flesh with the way people treat you and the way you need to be treating others. The people who know all of your buttons and just how to push them, they know your idols and they want to smash them. And they know I don't want to go there, but they know how to get you there. Right? So I would like you now, another self-examination. Probably while I've been talking, you've been thinking of a particular name. I want you to write that name down in your phone notes, on your notes right now. If you don't think that person will notice, write it down somewhere. That one person, your husband, your mother, your passionate child, your child that doesn't listen, your in-laws who might live with you, somebody, or a particular situation that constantly presses against your love of self. For me, when the kids were small, it was spilled milk. That was just the end of my day. I was like, oh, $5 on the ground. Now I'm just like, oh, so stupid. Okay. What is the name of the person or the situation that you always seem to see your fleshly, selfish responses show their ugly face the most? Write it down. Really do it. Write it down somewhere. That's called accountability. That name or that situation is where you need to start. That person or situation that is the hardest for you to show dying to self-love is God's present. It's his gift to you to help you practice daily dying. Through God's Spirit, you can learn to love that person or let that situation not press your button anymore. In the 1 Corinthians 13 self-sacrificing love pattern, you know what? In that situation, I can be patient and I can be kind to others, even though that situation just seems to throw me off every single time. Well, we have to be proactive, right? So you look at that name, you look at that situation, and that's what you need to give to the Lord. And you need to say, oh, that person, that situation is what keeps bothering me. But really, that's the opportunity God has given me to be sanctified and to die to myself. But what we don't do is we tend to shove it away, and we shove it away. We need to embrace it instead and say, thank you, God, for that person, or that situation that is constantly reminding me that I love me more than them, or I love me and I want my way in that situation. Maybe it's the way your kids put their clothes in their drawers. That's the kind of situation I'm talking about, that thing that just they know. Have you taught your children to love God? No, my parents have taught me about keeping my drawers clean. Like, you could ask your children, what's the one thing that makes mommy mad? If they don't say the glory of God and his name, which they probably won't, they'll tell you that one thing. And in fact, my niece was being babysat by somebody, and she's like, oh, Aunt Jill and the spilled milk. And I'm like, oh, okay, Lord, it's yours. Oh, thank you, Lord, for that opportunity. So, yes. So I don't know about you guys. I married an opposite, complete opposite. And I remember before I got married, my parents were raising me, and they said, Jill, you need to learn how to walk in someone else's shoes. Okay. I don't know how to do that. How do you do that? My brain cannot fathom how other people view life. I have this one outlook, and I've sought to teach myself how other people think, but it took a very long time, and it's still not perfect because I still think white, and my husband thinks black, and we're looking at the same thing. It's like Chinese, Spanish. It's complete opposite. So in my marriage is where this dying to self really started. Okay. So he will say something from a thinker-judger type of outlook, kind of like the glass is half empty. Realism, that's what it's called. And I'm like, oh, what? No, it's beautiful. No, let's just feel, you know. I'm sure it was wonderful. And he's like, well, no, facts. And I'm like, feelings. So this caused a lot of dying to self opportunities in my marriage. And then I gave birth to my husband again first. She is blessed with her dad's analytical minds. I don't have that. And then one by one, the other children came along, and they're like, more him, more me, more him. Totally different. So these different personalities the Lord puts in our home sanctify us, and they sandpaper us. And sometimes the grit is really fine. It's not so bad. I'm learning. And sometimes it's so hard, and it just rubs us the wrong way. And you realize that the way other people rub you the wrong way, you're probably rubbing other people that same. Like my husband's like, why does she not see this? Why is she so busy feeling all the time? That's not going to get us anywhere. So when we look at the people that God has given to us that are so absolutely different. Again, it's all of our mindset. It's the battle of the mind. God, this is a gift. This is an opportunity to sanctify me and not keep me in my little comfort zone. Just, happying my way to heaven, never changing. So when people are different, we recognize they are still equally created perfectly by God. That's how he created them. We're all putting off sin, Lord willing, other believers with other believers, but they are loved by God. They were made by God, and we need to embrace that. And we need to, in interacting with my husband and all my different children, it actually helps me interact with people in the church better, because people in the church are all going to be different as well, and we're going to talk about church in a minute. But the people that are different than me strip away my dependence on leaning on my own understanding, because otherwise I would only view the world through my glasses. But I have to put on my husband's and see the world through his. And my children, what's the world look like from their seat? And that helps me love those in the church that are different than me as well. It helps me serve them better. Like I said, my parents wanted me to walk in other people's shoes. I could not figure out what color Mark was seeing. I'm like, it's white. He says it's black. I don't understand. So we did a little personality test, which I think are good for a purpose. They help you understand a bit, not to put people in a box. But I was like, really? That's how he thinks? Because he couldn't explain it. That's his only viewpoint. He doesn't know how, So I found the personality test when 8 years ago, we finally did that after 20 years of being married. I was like, oh, okay, I really just need to be quiet. Okay. All right, got it. So that's just an example. Here are some other ideas in the home. Dying to self in the home. What about children who whine and complain endlessly? Here you can die to self by providing consistent discipline and finding helpful ways to derail them. But as you train them, you have to die to yourself in speaking sharply, scolding, threatening, angry outbursts because of their sin and its incessantness. Sometimes we have to look at where we are failing and not cast blame on unsaved, foolish children for our response. We must seek to walk in the Spirit and die to self in our disrupted, idealized, perfect lives. Well, if my children just did A, B, and C, we would just be the happiest family ever. We must die to selves and be the example. What if you have a spiritually weak husband who doesn't lead you as you desire, who leave you to grow alone and by yourself? Maybe dying to self looks like the nagging stopping, seeking Christ to be your all in all. Or maybe a husband who is sick, or maybe you have a husband who's in deep trials. Maybe they're whining and they're complaining, or they're constantly criticizing. Are you able to die to self by putting on a meek and quiet spirit in the face of that? Older women, it's your turn. Do you need to die to self in seeking your free time and pleasures in your now quieter home in your retirement years? How can you die to self? You're like, I put in the time. I raised the kids. I kept the house. I made the food. Now I get to coast. There's no spiritual retirement before heaven. There's no serving in the church retirement. In fact, Titus 2, older women, what'd you say? Teach. Oh, we're to teach. Now, that doesn't mean you have to stand up here. That's not what that means. Teach them how to love their husbands and children, how to care for the home. There's a delightful lady in our church who came into our church and realized everything she had never done or thought as a believer. And she's like, well, I make cards. So what does she do? She starts inviting the young ladies over to make cards, and the moms and everyone in between. And she's just teaching them how to make cards. She's like, what can I do with what I have? And she's got this huge craft room. So she uses it. She uses her community pool to sit there and hold people's babies while they get to play with their kids. It's such a beautiful thing to watch her unretiring. She's de-retiring. Are there younger women, or maybe 5 younger women, depending on your suitcase and how much you can pack, that you could spend your free time coming alongside, serving them with childcare, discipleship, teaching them how to do? Maybe you're fantastic at something. But we teach one another that. That falls under, older women teach them how to care for their homes and be kind. And while you're there, you can notice how it's going with their kids and offer them some loving words. If they don't take the words from you, that's on them, just so you know. So the church is our spiritual family. Older women, we need you to be dying to yourself for us too. We need you. Maybe, ladies, you're tested by people like me who are extroverted talkers. Maybe in your home, that's where you're being tested. Maybe you see yourself as more righteous because you don't say everything you think or feel. So we can both err on the side of thinking we're more righteous because we communicate or because we communicate less. You wish you could just be alone and quiet, and then you wouldn't be so frustrated by all the peopleness around you. How can you die to self? It takes a lot of work. I had a friend who said she could just see the energy coming out of her mouth when she had to talk. I was like, wow, really? That's incredible. But she learned to stand in a group, and everyone else did the talking, but she was still a part of it, you know? So anyway, it's just neat how we can figure it out. So how can you push yourself with the family that God has given you in the social situations, using your spiritual gifts and words, edifying your family? Okay, if you have less words, well, just make sure they're good. Use God's words. The home is a perfect place for you to practice dealing with all the peopleness. Young ladies, your turn. They're all over here. How about parents or adults who are maybe critical of you in front of others, whether on purpose or just moms like to talk about their kids and you're like, oh, she just said that. My girls, they feel this. Can you die to self by humbly remembering even when Christ had things spoken about him that shouldn't have been or were unkind or wrong or mocking? Can you put off anger at other people's insensitivities, forgive and love, and die to self by displaying love, showing obedience to imperfect parents, imperfect family members? Maybe your grandparents say things to you that are just not well thought out or critical of you. How can you respond in love and obedience and honor to those who are older? Young ladies, you are sinners, and so are your parents and your grandparents and your families around you. We need to die to self and love them regardless. For moms at home specifically, young mamas, are you dissatisfied with your role at home in the labor years, I call them, of parenting, where you don't sleep and you barely eat? What you eat is old macaroni and cheese. Are you comparing your life to other women? Are you comparing your life to other families, to Instagram, to the shined up version on Pinterest? Are you discontent with being home, training, discipling, disciplining, wiping bottoms and noses, shoveling toys while it's still snowing, so to speak, with all the mess? Have you become discontent in that trial, that those labor years the Lord has given you? Have you ever considered that even the act of changing a diaper is an act of worship to God as you serve another? Are you recognizing the high calling of motherhood and homemaking? You're impressing on the next generation how they need to be and how they need to walk and how they glorify God and how God's women actually live and walk differently than the world. Perhaps you homeschool, and it's not the rosy picture you imagined of skipping through fields of daisies and just stopping and smelling them. It's work. It's hard work. So you maybe overplan activities so you're not really stuck at home, or maybe you're angry all the time. Do you need to die to your idols of perfect domestic tranquility, or even having your house clean a certain way because you've chosen to actually teach and it's hard to keep up with all those things at once? Do you need to die to self in that clean house, or those perfectly obedient children, or books and stuff everywhere, or actually not getting out to the meadow to smell the flowers? Do you need to die to self by staying home and actually home schooling? Not like travel schooling, because you're just so busy doing so many things. So you want to have some quality over quantity. Are there areas there you need to die to self? And my last example, maybe you're single, in case I haven't hit everyone yet. Maybe you're single. Maybe you have a slobby roommate. My sophomore year of college, I had the world's slobbiest roommate. My girls don't even know her name because I just call her the slobby roommate. What a trial that was. Oh, it was such a trial. So how can you die to self as a single girl with your roommate or your sisters or people you share your home with and they don't do things just the way you like? Certainly, you have to communicate with people and how to contribute and work hard and live orderly. But instead of fuming and being angry or confronting it that way, what about finding little ways to serve? I know as a mom, I'm like, it's their job to do the dishes. A roommate might say that, it's your job to do the dishes. But what if you just did it one time to serve? We tend not to because we fear they're going to take advantage of that. That's not dying to self. But we can be kind and we can pray for others. We can find a way to rejoice, even in the difficulty of living with someone who's slobby or unhelpful. Look for the ways that God is sanctifying your heart and refining it as gold in the hot fire of these unique trials of when you're single. Because there are going to be more things down the road as you get older. So this focus of dying to self in the home is huge and took the most time. The other ones are much shorter, and it blends really well into our look at dying to self in the church. And normally I would flow right into that, but it is lunchtime. So we're going to flow right into that after lunch and wrap up the other 5 ways, which are much shorter, but I really wanted to just try to prime the pump, giving you ideas of what this might look like in the home. So we're going to come back after lunch and look at the last 5 ways. And then we're going to just open up the floor if you have any questions about what we talked about today. If it's deeply theological, I'll refer you to your pastor. But I want you to know now, in case you're thinking about it, we're going to have some Q&A time. I don't know how much time we're going to have. You can ask anything. You can ask, like, you still have a burning question about how something is going on in my life in Florida or about anything pertaining to women. Women don't often have opportunity to just ask questions. I know when we have like church Q&A, women rarely like to go up to the mic and ask a question. So I'm just opening it up to whatever you want to ask about. So I just want to let you know that now in case you wanted to ask something later during that Q&A time. But I'll have Chris come back up and